on the front 2 rows, a little confetti, and they shrieked in terror. Well, maybe not terror. Surprise. It's okay, you don't have to pick them up yet. So, and then they laughed. They laughed. What happened? What happened there? Stimulus, response. A lot more than that. A lot more than that. Their nervous systems were providing them with information. At first it was false. Dr. Sneary is drinking. False information. Dr. Sneary is moving funny. Look how he's throwing something at the audience. He's obviously an insane professor. One of many. Sounds right? Wait a minute though. It's not coffee. It's something else. It's colored. It's floating. It's not harmful. Time to laugh. Neuron to neuron. Yeah, well, it's kind of, right? Neuron to neuron to neuron to neuron. Signals being sent. At some point they said, confetti. Oh, okay. That's pretty, it's not dangerous. I'm okay. I'll laugh. So they had to reach back into their history. Somehow they had to access files that said, confetti, paper, something fun is happening. He's not insane. Well, maybe he is, but he's not insane in that regard, so it's okay. What's he going to do next? He's going to talk to us about the nervous system. So you have very simple stimulus response properties. Stimulus, and then you've heard the term reflex. Very simple muscular reflex. Your doctor tells you to sit on the table, and then she hits your patellar tendon and you kick. Okay? That's a very simple stimulus response involving communication of neurons. But that's simple. Something like that just occurred is incredibly complex, involving thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of neurons. Accessing memory is one aspect of that complicated response. So I'm a neurobiologist. I study the nervous system, certain parts of the nervous system. All those simple reflexes, all those complex pathways, all of your dreams, your ability to write, your ability to read, your ability to remember, your ability to create as an artist or as an engineer or as a scientist. All of these things, all of them, your relationships that you have with your colleagues, with your family, with your loved ones, should be, right? But all of those relationships that you have, all those emotions that you feel when you listen to music, when you see great art, all of it, every bit of it is encoded in the response properties of neurons, the response properties of nerve cells. I can't think of anything more interesting than that. There are things that are more significant in certain ways, definitely, like how your relationships are going. Those are significant in a lot of ways, in many ways, many more important ways. But I can't think of anything more interesting than understanding how information is encoded in the nervous system. There's a book that was, I can't remember the author, but there was a book that was written some time ago that was titled The 3-Pound Universe. You, in a very interesting way, contain the universe within your brain. The Mayans had a concept of zero. Nothing. How do you capture nothing in your brain? The Mayans did it. How do you capture an unbounded universe in your brain? You can do it. bounded? I don't know. But you can capture that too. The idea is that your ability to hold and to process and to analyze information is limitless. Wow. You are way cool. Wait. Lots of organisms have this ability to a certain extent. Processing information in significantly complex ways. No one knows the boundaries of any particular organism with regards to their ability to think, process information. So it has something to do with the basic structure of the nervous system. And the nervous system, the major component, not the only component, the major component are the individual nerve cells. And so, as a neurobiologist, I've studied the structure of nerve cells, and I've studied the function of individual nerve cells. It's only within the last 10 years or so that investigators have been able to look at the response properties of groups of neurons at the same time, and so understand a little bit more about information that's processed. But that doesn't mean that we know everything about individual neurons. And I'm going to give you a 2 days crash course in neurobiology. And this is to give you some appreciation, really, for the basic science, but also for your own abilities. And maybe give you some sense of how you should take care of yourself as you are stressed here at San Jose State. I understand that. Okay? So, one of the things, this is what I'm going to talk about here, just an outline, the concept of nature versus nurture. You guys have access to this, right? Or not yet? Hello? No, not yet. Okay. Michael will get this, and he'll post it for you guys, so you don't have to make drawings or something. It's always a good idea, I'm not telling you to take notes, but it's always a good idea to take notes about things that you might find challenging so that you can go back and look them over again, or just things that you might find interesting. Hopefully you find something interesting. And you might want to visit that at another time. So an overview of the function of the nervous system and its structure, the anatomy, or that comes from the Greek, to cut. The anatomy of the neuron, stages of development, we'll get to that next time, developmental milestones. So we'll talk about developing brain, and not just as in embryonic development, but in development during puberty and early adulthood and the aging brain. We'll talk about that as well. All of our brains are aging. So, our characteristics are determined by a number of different things. One is what we inherit from our parents. Basic genetic information is contained within a single kind of a molecule, deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. That was a huge discovery in the middle of the 20th century. How is the genetic information transferred from one generation to the next? There's a molecule that does it. It's got a code. Okay. So we inherit information. That's sort of the basic plan. And then we do risks on this basic plan throughout our lives. The environment around us does that. We make decisions which change the way our inherited information is expressed, just by how you eat and what you drink and how you live your life. Your lifestyle will change how the genetic information is expressed. So here's a list of a variety of different things that are influenced by nature or genetic information and also by the environment. You'll see up there, eye color is influenced by both. The basic pattern of your eye color is inherited from your parents and previous generations, but exactly how that might appear is a function of your diet, for instance, or whether or not you have particular disease states that might affect the eye color. So the basic pattern is there. If we just go down the list of genetics over there on the left, menopause or puberty is programmed into us. Production of vitamin D, the chemical pathways that provide for vitamin D, whether or not we're allergic to things, diseases, inherited diseases like diabetes, some kinds of diabetes, heart disease, maybe cancer, pigmentation, skin color, all of these things have a basic pattern of inheritance that you get from previous generations. And then the nurture, over here on the right, as I said, eye color is dependent on a variety of different things like diet and disease. You can replace hormones. You can get store-bought hormones and replace the hormones maybe that you're not producing because of a disease situation. You can treat allergies. You can take vitamin D pills. There's a variety of different therapies for diabetes and heart conditions and cancer. And your pigmentation or skin color is also a function, certainly to different degrees, of your exposure to the sun or lack of exposure to the sun. Some people can get marvelous hands, others just burn, like myself. So the bottom line here is that what you see in an individual is a function of what they inherited and also of their environment. It's an environment that they create to a certain extent, and in other cases it's an environment that just sort of impinges itself on the individual. If you live in a cold climate, that kind of thing. Of course, you can decide to move. So it's a mixture of both of those kinds of things. There are two control systems in biological organisms. Two control systems in vertebrate animals like yourself. One is the endocrine system, or hormone system. And that's a control system that is based on the presence of a variety of different glands, like your thyroid gland or your adrenal gland. And these glands produce hormones that have effects throughout the body. Okay, maybe on heart rate or lean body mass, those kinds of things are related to hormone release. The hallmark of the endocrine system is that it acts slowly, and its effect is very long-lasting. The other system is the nervous system, and this is a system that acts millisecond to millisecond. So it has very fast effects. Not only does it work quickly, but the effects of activating the nervous system also happen very quickly, as you saw in my example. All those responses were very fast. The electrical properties or ionic properties of nerve cells really are working on a millisecond by millisecond time frame. Right? The nervous system is monitoring not only the external environment through our senses, our sense of touch, our sense of smell, our sense of hearing, our sense of balance, monitoring the external environment, vision, of course, but monitoring the internal environment. So you have background programs that are monitoring your heart rate and your acid-base levels within your tissues. All different kinds of things are being monitored. Whether or not you are processing food through the digestive system and how that's going, that's processed in the background. Some of these things you're aware of, other things you're not aware of. But that information is being captured and analyzed, both from outside you and inside you. And these, obviously, I think, have importance in the survival of an organism. You respond to events, dangerous events, in certain ways to remove yourself from them, right? So it's important in the survival of the organism. And because it's important in the survival of the organism, it's important in the reproduction. If you don't survive, you don't reproduce. Okay? And the basis for evolution over millions of years is the ability to survive long enough to reproduce and pass on your genetic information. So the nervous system, a good nervous system, is a really good thing. It can keep you out of trouble if you listen to it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of terminology here. As a biologist, that's what we do. It's like totally different language. Not totally different. There are some terms that you don't use on the street. Okay? So your nervous system is divided into two general parts. The first is the central nervous system, and the second is the peripheral nervous system. Okay? The central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. Okay? So your brain is housed within your skull, protected by thick layers of bone, and your spinal cord is housed in your vertebral column, also protected by thick layers of bone. Although your vertebral column articulates, and that can be a problem because if you articulate it the wrong way, you can damage your spinal cord. Not good. But still, you have a protective layer around the spinal cord itself. Right? Now, the peripheral nervous system includes the nerves that extend out into your arms and your legs, out to your hands and your feet, and onto the surface of your skin. So there's a sensory net, and that part of the peripheral nervous system is called the afferent or sensory input to the central nervous system. So this is the neurons that are supplying information about the position of my leg in three-dimensional space, the position of my head in three-dimensional space, visual image of you, the smell of you. I think that's probably once daily. Not the person, but the hall. Okay? The sound of you rustling in your seats nervously. So that's afferent input. And afferent input is not only coming from the outside and the surface of the body and these sensory receptors, but also internally. As I said, the brain is constantly monitoring your heart rate, and it's not something that you're necessarily conscious of, but that information is being provided. So there's external information and there's internal information being provided through these afferent pathways. And then there are efferent pathways, and that means motor. So now you're driving the musculature. Okay? You're moving your eyes in three-dimensional space. You're moving your head in three-dimensional space. So there's input to the central nervous system, the spinal cord, the brain, and there's output out to muscles and glands. So the input in my first example here was pretty much visual, by throwing the confetti. And the response in the audience was at first sensory, so visual, right? And then there was output from the central nervous system to drive their muscles so that they moved out of the way. And then there was input into the respiratory muscles and muscles lining the oral cavity, and they laughed. So afferent pathways or sensory pathways and efferent pathways as well. If you divide that further, the efferent, you divide it into a somatic motor system. You divide it into a somatic motor system, and that controls skeletal muscle. So movement of the extremities. Good example. A second division is called the autonomic, and that means it kind of operates on its own, right? And that includes smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. So your heart is under autonomic control, it's controlled kind of on its own, right? And the smooth muscle that lines your gut, your gastrointestinal system, is kind of on automatic. It is on automatic control. I can't sit here and go, okay, I'm moving my small intestine. I can't do that. Right? But it moves nonetheless because I had a cup of coffee and it's done. Confetti. Yes, I was drinking confetti. The autonomic nervous system is further divided into a rest and digest system, so movement of or contraction or relaxation of smooth muscle in my gut. That's under control of what's called the parasympathetic system. And then the sympathetic system is called the flight or fright system. So when you are startled Like when somebody throws confetti at you, your heart rate goes up. You don't control that. Heart rate up. No, it just goes up on its own because you were terrified. Surprised. Maybe surprised. Maybe not terrified, but surprised. Okay? So that's the sympathetic nervous system. So the output from the brain and the spinal cord can either control things voluntarily, like skeletal muscle, or involuntarily, like the smooth muscle of the gut and the cardiac muscle of the heart. Now, this is all of these pathways are based on the ability of individual neurons or nerve cells to communicate with each other. The basic activity within a nerve cell, a single nerve cell, is electrical. And that's not really the right word. You can use that word, but it's technically not correct. Because when you talk about electricity, you're talking about movement of electrons. In the case of the electricity that's developed in nerve cells, you're talking about the movement of charged ions, atoms that have a charge, a plus or a minus charge. In either case, in both cases, in an electrical wire or in a neuron, you're talking about the movement of charges. So you can kind of use that term electrical. And practicing neurobiologists use that term as well. It's just it's not technically correct. Maybe correct to say ionic. Movement of ions. Now, I was just talking to the second semester biology core class. Is anybody in? No, you guys are all first semester sort of, right? Is anybody in Bio 1B? No, not yet. At 1A. Whoa, okay. So I was talking to the biology class the other day. I do lectures in that course. And the movement of ions across the membranes is what drives neurons. It also drives muscle cells. So these properties are based on the movement of ions. 40%, almost half of all of your metabolic energy goes into moving ions. 40% of the energy that you acquire from the food that you eat goes into moving ions. So it's really important. It's really important. It's the basis for activity in nerve cells and in muscle cells. In fact, those cells are called excitable cells, as opposed to some glandular cell or a skin cell that's not excitable. Neurons and muscle cells are excitable, but all cells, including your skin cells and your salivary gland cells and whatever cells you want to talk about, all of them move ions across their membranes. And 40% of the metabolic energy is spent doing that. So it's an important kind of thing to understand, especially as a biologist. But I think it's an important thing to think about just as a non-biologist, that almost half of what you eat goes into transporting ions. And that's very important in the function of the nervous system. So here's a diagram. I have some more that are coming up of two neurons. And these are funky looking cells. Neurons have a very specific kind of architecture. It's different. If you look at a garden variety, you can use that word, phrase, if you look at a garden variety liver cell, or a cell that lines your stomach, or a skin cell, not so interesting. Sort of cuboidal, maybe spherical, maybe sort of flat and drawn out. Interesting, important. But that's just weird. That's just a weird looking cell. It has two important general parts. The first part, over here in gold or yellow, is referred to as an input region. So this is where information is coming into this cell. This portion right here in red, and these little finger-like processes, is the output region. So this is a cell that has input functions and output functions. It sounds like a computer. Way. A lot like a computer. It's a lot like a computer. Okay, I'll tell you more in a minute. All right, so the input region has a sort of a large portion that's called the cell body, and that's where the nucleus is located, and that contains the genetic information. And then these little processes that are sticking out are called dendrites, and that's from the Greek dendron, which means tree or branch. So it's a sort of a central cell body with all these interesting branches on it. The output region consists of a singular process called the axon. And then the axon branches out at its end. So that's the output region. So information is coming into this region of the cell, and it's traveling down the axon, and it's going to a target. That target could be another nerve cell. If we're stuck in the brain someplace, for instance, and there's nerve cells connected to nerve cells connected to nerve cells. This could be a cell that extends out into the peripheral nervous system and goes out and contacts the skeletal muscle, like your gastrocs down in your leg. But the point is the same, is that there's an input region, information coming into the cell, and then an output region going towards the target. Another way to say this, a more technical way, is that in this input region, you have changes in ion concentrations across the membrane. And these changes can be referred to as continuously variable. They change continuously over time. Up and down, concentrations are changing over time. You can describe that kind of input as analog input, continuously varying. In the old days, when I was younger, we had records. Right? And you had a plastic record with grooves on it. And you put a needle on the grooves, and the record spins, and you get music or something. Right? That's a continuously variable system. The structure of the grooves changes continuously, and therefore the current driving the speakers of your stereo system changes continuously. Analog. Now, right there, there's a big change. Big. The continuously varying activity that's occurring with these ion concentrations in the membrane of the dendrites in the cell body is converted into something different. The message now becomes digital. This is analog. This is digital. This is an A to D device. That's interesting. That's more like a computer. That's why neuroscientists and engineers are talking to each other. They had that for a while. I did my postdoc at Berkeley, electrical engineering. 10 minutes? Can you give me 5? Tell me 5.
Okay.
I could go on for 6 months. You don't tell me. I have to throw confetti in to wake you up. Okay, so this is an A to D device. So now, if you go in here and you look at what's going on in these cells, there are spikes of activity. And that's the digital effect. So you have a continuously varying movement of ions across the membrane here, and here it's discontinuous, spiking down, spiking down. You can think of this now, the information is being encoded in this axon as spike on, spike off. Ooh, zeros and ones. Again, a digital device. Now you're multiplying all of this by billions of cells, and that's just too confusing for me. I'll deal with the cell. That'll work. Even there, it's a little hairy. Okay? So a neuron is an excitable cell, and the processes transmit information by electrical and chemical signaling. Now this is, once again, it's signaling by ion flow in both the input region and the output region. Always talking about ions. Now these cells just don't sit there and have continuously varying ion movement and digitally varying ion movement. They connect like in that last photograph, from one cell to another. So somehow the cell has to talk to its target. Now this is interesting in that talking to the target involves the release of a chemical. And that's called a neurotransmitter. So the ionic activity that's happening in an individual neuron is then translated into the release of a chemical. And then that takes the message to the next cell. Could be another neuron, could be a muscle cell. Depends. The neurons connect to each other to form networks. And these neurons are the components of both the central and the peripheral nervous system. Okay? I was getting ahead of myself. That's okay. So we've got dendrites in the input region. That includes the cell body, and the cell body has the nucleus, and then the axon transmits the information in a digital fashion. The junction between the neuron and its target is called the synapse. And that comes from the Greek, meaning junction. So this is the site of neurotransmitter release. And there's if you look at the end of the axon in that picture, it has some branches. And out at the end of each branch is usually a little expansion, like a little bulb, and that's called the presynaptic terminal. It's the end of the axon where communication is going to take place with the target cell. 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead to my picture here. I'll send that one as well to you. Okay, that's good. Now, here's a point that's important. And that is that the axon can be just a process of the cell, an extension of the cell, or it can be associated with another cell that covers it, that insulates it. In a way, like the insulation or the coating around an electrical wire, a copper wire, similar. But in this case, that insulation is formed by a number of different cells. And if those cells aren't functioning very well, then the function of sending information down the axon isn't going to work. Okay? So here's a picture very much like the other one. This is actually a photograph of an individual neuron. Back in the 19th century, there was an Austrian who was noted because he could dissect or remove individual neurons. That's hard to believe. But he has, as a result, he's got all kinds of things named after him. Golgi, Emilio Golgi, Italian. Okay? So here's the dendrites of the cell body, axon and axon terminals. And maybe I'll just do one more slide, and then I'll let you guys go. All right? And here is a drawing of what myelin looks like. So right here, it's hard to see a little bit because of the lighting. This yellow is the axon, just the axon of the cell, just the axon. And then surrounding it is this insulation called myelin. And myelin is really an extension of a cell, a supporting cell that comes over and wraps itself around the axons that are near it. And you can see that it's wrapped around. There are lots of disease states like multiple sclerosis that have to do with malfunction in the myelin. Myelin allows the transmission of information down the axon. Okay? Deep breath. I'll let you go. Okay? Very well. Did I dismiss them?
Yeah.
You are dismissed.